Good afternoon. This is Dr. Gary Verna, sitting in for Dr. Martin Sellers, who I suppose had second thoughts being surrounded by so many psychologists. The program today is about psychology. We're going to spend some time talking a little bit about our program, as well as developments in our field. I'm here with my colleagues, Dr. Lee Gilroy, Dr. Sherry Browning, and two students taking psychology courses toward a psychology degree, Autumn Bennington and Chris Dunn. I think a good place to begin would be with a couple of announcements. Dr. Gilroy has something to say about an upcoming event here at the university.
Thank you. I just wanted to make an announcement that the theater and music departments are pleased to present the well-known popular musical Fiddler on the Roof. The show will be performed at the Sam and Sue Mars Performing Arts Center in Duke Hall on LMU's main campus. There will be 5 opportunities to see this show, the first being a special preview performance tomorrow, April 13th at 7 p.m. There also will be a matinee next Wednesday, April 19th at 12 p.m. And then there will be a 3-night run at the end of next week, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, April 20th, 21st, and 22nd. All of those shows are at 7 p.m. Tickets are $10 for adults, $5 for students and kids, and LMU students and staff get free admission. You can purchase tickets at the door, cash only, or if you'd like to pre-order your tickets to be sure you have a seat, please email Joseph Gill, that is joseph.gill at lmunet.edu. And I just want to informally tell you there's a pretty good buzz around campus regarding this show. People were talking about it all over campus yesterday, and we heard a little bit from the performers that are in there, and I don't want to spoil any of the surprises that you'll see at the show, but oy vey, it's going to be a good show.
I'm glad to hear that. Also, Dr. Browning is the supervisor for the psychology club in our program, and I believe she has some things coming up that she would like to let the listeners hear.
I sure do. We actually have one more fundraising event that will occur on April 24th in the Manns Building on LMU's campus. We are going to be bussing in some Chick-fil-A biscuits, which seem to be, very, very popular in this area since we don't have a Chick-fil-A nearby. So we will be selling them for $4 a biscuit. And if that is something that interests you, we would love to have you come and stop by starting around 9:30 a.m. on Monday, April 24th.
Thank you. A good way to start off this segment today would be to let each of the 3 of us faculty members who are responsible for the psychology program describe this program in a little bit of detail, and then we'll start talking about some other aspects of just the field of psychology in general, things that are going on. We have 3 tracks, and Dr. Gilroy will outline what those 3 tracks of study are in our program for the undergraduate students who come to Lincoln Memorial University.
Yes, quite recently we revised the psychology program, and so we have 3 different concentrations tracks. We have a general track, we have a counseling and practice track, and we have a science and research track. Now, the basis for all of these tracks have the same sort of core fundamental courses. So all students will take Introduction to Psychology, Child and Adolescent Development, a statistics course, a research course, and so on. But then if you choose one of the other 2 tracks, you'll take some specialized courses. So for example, in the counseling and practice track, you will take theories of psychotherapy, psychological tests and measurements. If you're on the science and research track, you might take neuropsychology or cognitive psychology course. And then from time to time, we are trying to work in some specialized topic courses that we think will be of interest to some students. And we've done 2 of those over the past year and a half or so.
Yeah, and I think it would be worth describing. Dr. Gilroy has introduced a course in psychology of music, and he'll be talking about that in a little bit. Dr. Browning recently introduced a course in the evolution of evolutionary psychology. And we're really excited to have a greater breadth in the course offerings that we provide for the students here. Why don't we start with you, Dr. Browning, and describe the course that you introduced last year.
Okay, so I introduced this course, Evolutionary Psychology, or Introduction to Evolutionary Psychology. And really what the class was looking at was how we can explain human behavior, try to answer the why questions, like why are we prone to seeking out sugar as opposed to vegetables, or why don't we really prefer sour foods or bitter foods. And we also talked about some physiological changes, like why do our fingers get pruny when they're wet? It helps us when we're grasping things underwater to have better traction on those objects. But yeah, the whole course was just trying to look at the various human behaviors we have, like why are we altruistic? Why do we get aggressive? With whom do we get aggressive with? And actually, I can bring in Christopher Dunn, was one of my students in that class. Was there a particular topic that we discussed that kind of resonated with you, one that seemed to be more memorable to you?
Honestly, the whole class sort of stood out in that we have to, almost all of us here at LMU, take biology classes, and the second biology class focuses so much on evolution and why things happen and how it happens, but it doesn't cover that topic. So to tie that together with what we're learning in biology with the field of psychology and what I'm spending most of my time studying, I thought was really interesting.
And that was one of the purposes of the class, was to take more of an interdisciplinary approach, trying to also attract not only psychology students, but biology students, possibly students that were pre-veterinary students who, are interested in animals. And we did a little bit of comparative talk there, trying to compare human behavior with animal behavior. So, yeah, overall, I thought it was a very interesting class, and I do look forward to teaching it again in the future.
You've also been working on another course with that would be considered comparative. Would you like to talk about the social behavior course that you've been working on for the students?
Absolutely. I've been putting together a comparative social psychology course. Right now it is being offered as a summer course, but hopefully in the near future we'll be able to offer it during the school year as well. But what I'm doing is, again, it's comparative, so we're taking what we know about human social behavior, but also looking at it in terms of the various animals. So I can give you an example with play behavior. Okay, we know humans like to play. We play throughout all of our stages of life, but in general, we only see that young animals will play. And so one of our class topics would be, what are the functions of animal play? We see cats playing, pouncing on various items, and one of the functions of that is to help them prepare for predatory behaviors, trying to capture prey. And that's in a system that it's a safe area, a safe time for them, where they're not having to worry about being preyed upon. So we would talk about that as an example of one of our topics.
Thank you. One of the goals of the program in psychology, and we've been working in the last couple of years to expand our focus so that we have as broad a perspective as we can bring to understanding behavior, human behavior, behavior of the domestic animals that are such a large part of our lives, and so forth. So we want students to see things from different perspectives, at different levels in the scale of animals, if you will. And these two courses that Dr. Browning is talking about are a major step in that direction. And she brings to those courses not only her background in psychology, but also a major background in biology as well. Dr. Gilroy has introduced a new course, and again, with our attempt to broaden our scope and to overlap with other disciplines, so that people can see that psychology isn't just something that you study or only applies in certain context in your life, but applies to every aspect of your life. Would you like to introduce the Psychology of Music course that you've developed?
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. This was a new course that we put together this semester, but I'm hopeful that it'll be something we can repeat in the future. It's a very interesting course and has a number of topics that most people don't think about when they think about how music and psychology may interact, but it's pretty clear that music is a very important and influential part of most people's lives. And so we might ask the question, why is that? Music has no evident survival advantage to us, at least in the present day. And so it's kind of amazing that this unique aspect of our culture, of all cultures, as a matter of fact, is so ubiquitous. So in the class, we talk about different things such as music acquisition, what type of musical structures or musical aspects of music that we are attuned to from birth, what are the things that we learn throughout our lifespan. Certainly we can talk about music and its role in social settings and social interactions. So across all cultures there are religious ceremonies or group gatherings, and almost all of those have music incorporated with them. We can think about that on a different scale in our own society. Most parties have music associated with them. Most weddings, social gatherings, sporting events, all of that has music associated with it. And then we sort of move into the neurological basis of music. So what are the structures in our brain that allow us to perceive music? Do we have specialized neurological structures for just perceiving music, or is there overlap with other functions that we engage in? And that's quite interesting. That was a topic we actually discussed yesterday, that there seems to be some common areas to processing, say, language and music, but there are also very distinct areas for processing music quite apart from language. And then one of the most interesting topics, I think, with the psychology of music is the emotional aspect of music. So that also seems to be ubiquitous around the world, that music has a unique ability to evoke emotions, more so to a certain extent than visual images. And we know, again, there are brain areas specialized for processing emotion, and this is found in a part of the brain called the limbic system. And in particular, you have one area of your brain called the amygdala, that it's a structure thought to process emotions, particularly fear. And, you know, a wise philosopher once said, fear leads to anger, and anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. But what is interesting about this is studies show that music has the power to alter our moods and our emotions. And so it's known that people can use music to alleviate negative moods and induce positive moods. And I think we all kind of understand this sort of informally, whether we're, you know, specifically doing that to knowing that we're elevating our mood. If we had sort of a rough day at work or something makes us sad, we kind of naturally turn on our favorite songs and sort of dance along. And there are a number of other studies that we talk about in this course. Some interesting studies about how music can affect other behaviors. And so one recent study that we found recently is that those children that have music training actually show higher IQ levels. And so students took a year of music training, and their IQ scores after that year of music training were shown to be higher than those students who didn't. And I think that's important for our society, where educational systems are having budget crises and they're sort of cutting music and the arts out of school programs.
That's incredible to hear about the overall effect of music on other aspects of behavior. We're going to take a short break and be right back, and I'd like to continue with this discussion on music when we return. Thank you.
I want to thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's about time for the band to have a short break, I believe. about your breath.
There is a jewel in the crown right here in our Cumberland Mountains, and it's the Abraham Lincoln Library and Museum, located here on the historic campus of LMU. It houses one of the top 5 Lincoln and Civil War collections in the entire world, and it's right here in our own backyard, located here in Harrogate, Tennessee, at the main entrance of LMU's campus. For more information, their number is 423-869-6235 and on the World Wide Web at lmunet.edu/museum.
On Wednesday evenings, you can tune your radio to WLMU and hear the best blues in the tri-state area with your host, Gary Daniels. He'll be playing the best blues artists of today and the best blues artists of yesteryear. Everything from Robert Johnson, Buddy Guy, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Muddy Waters, and many more. It's Wednesday Evening Blues from 9 to 11, right here on 91.3 WLMU.
Support for WLMU's broadcast and webcast is made possible by Lincoln Memorial University. Established in 1897, LMU is located alongside the Cumberland Mountains of East Tennessee, Southeast Kentucky, and Southwest Virginia. LMU offers educational opportunities that are based on the foundations of tradition, values, and service. To find out more about academics, campus life, athletics, admissions, and financial aid, you can visit their website, lmunet.edu.
On Tuesday evenings here on WLMU, you can tune into Music City Roots, a nationally syndicated program that airs from the stage of the historic Loveless Cafe in Nashville, Tennessee. Music City Roots is recorded live and hosted by Jim Lauderdale. It features Americana, roots, rock, blues, string band, singer-songwriter, and other forms of American roots music. It's Music City Roots every Tuesday night from 6 to 7 here on WLMU.
Welcome back. This is Psychology Today. We're missing you, Dr. Seller. I want to pick up on something that Dr. Gilroy said about music and its effect on other behavior besides the listening aspects of music, and that is whenever I go to a restaurant in the afternoon, they're always playing fast music. And whenever I go to even that same restaurant in the evening, they're playing slower music. And I've noticed that my cadence in eating matches the music. And I figure in the afternoon they want me out. In the evening they're not as big a hurry to get me out of the restaurant.
You're setting the ambience, right?
Yes, absolutely. Was there other things that you wanted to say about music and people's behaviors? I mean, it's really a really powerful and important topic.
Well, I mean, the course could go in so many different directions because there's so many ways that music relates to our behavior. And I think one of the interesting ways, and maybe you can chime in on this, is how music relates to people's personality. And certainly from the social aspect, right, people will break into different cliques or groups based on what type of music they like and they listen to. So you'll have a group of people who identify with other people who love jazz music. And then you'll have a completely different group of people who cannot stand jazz music or opera or both kinds of music, country and Western. And so you have these little cliques. And I think it's largely based on one's personality.
I agree. I think in some respects people match their music with their temperament. And there are other times, I think, more situationally specific, I suppose, when people try to change that mood using music. And this is a good place to bring in Autumn in regard to, do you play any special music before you go out at a meet?
Yeah, as a team, we usually listen to mostly rap music because of the high tempo. It helps to pump us up before games.
Okay. When you look at your studies and your performance as an athlete, are there certain things that you either borrow from psychology or really are psychological in the sense that there are ways to either pump yourself up, be focused in one way or another? Do you spend a lot of time alone, away from other people right before the event, or?
Well, recently our coach started doing this thing right before games where she has us close our eyes and visualize how we want the game to go. And I found that was interesting because it really changed the way we spend time in the locker room, like laughing, dancing, pumping each other up, and then our coach comes in and she does this focusing thing, and then after that we're pretty much silent. I don't know what kind of effect it has on all of us, but she has us like, okay, visualize the first draw of the game, visualize the first goal, visualize yourself going through these actions. And I thought of that from a psychological standpoint because it really has an effect on my team that you wouldn't think it would have on a bunch of college girls.
But you're right, it does. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty powerful technique, and that's something we just covered in cognitive psychology class. So one way you can store knowledge in your brain and recover that knowledge is through something called mental imagery, right? So as a silly example, if you can imagine the capital letter D and take that letter D and rotate it counterclockwise by 90 degrees, and then in the middle of that you put a capital letter J, an image of a familiar object probably comes to mind. Does anybody want to guess?
Umbrella.
An umbrella, right. And so the only way we can do that task mentally is to be able to picture these things in our mind. So if you take it one step further, you can imagine pretty much any of your sensory abilities, including your ability to move on top of that. So you'll often see this if you watch the Olympics or if you watch the X Games. You'll have the people waiting to take their run, say, down a half pipe, and they'll be sitting there rocking back and forth, and it looks like maybe they're dancing to some music, but what they're really doing is practicing their routine before they do it. And it's a very, very powerful tool because it activates a particular type of neuron in the brain called mirror neurons. So we actually have neurons in our brain that become active when we just think about performing an action or we watch somebody else engaging in an action. And it sort of primes the system to be ready for action. And so what Autumn was explaining here is probably a very good technique. You're actually priming the brain to get ready to see yourself scoring or see yourself blocking or whatever the case may be.
Do you suppose this will ever substitute for those large pasta stuffings that athletes do before an event?
I don't know. Maybe. I feel like that in the end ends up being kind of a team bonding thing,
Yeah.
which is pretty important for any sports team, because if you don't have that sense of team, then you're not going to play very well.
But if you could raise that energy level and that focus with what we're describing here, either music or the focus on these activities, then maybe we don't have to fuel up with so much pasta the night before. What do you think, Chris?
I think you can never have too much pasta.
Pasta.
Oh my gosh, politician in the making. Let's move over. During the break, a question was raised about whether or not birds sing to one another, and maybe they don't, or maybe we don't know. But
Well,
somebody
the
knows a lot
question
about
is,
birds.
It's not. We were talking about over the break, whether or not animals enjoy music too, and that's a question I don't know the answer to, and maybe Dr. Gilroy has read some comparative literature on that. But yes, birds do sing to each other, but it's not necessarily for the reason that we would listen to music. They sing to attract a mate, and they're advertising, how attractive they are, how good of a mate they may be, how big their territory is depending on the species. So yes, they do sing to one another, but not for the same reasons humans sing to each other.
Okay. Well, while we're talking about birds, though, one of your areas of interest is in social behavior of animals, including birds. You have any tips for the listener out there when they're out strolling in the woods?
Well, probably the most important tip is to just open your eyes. I can't tell you how many times I've asked my students, have you ever seen a Carolina chickadee? And I know for sure that every student has seen a Carolina chickadee. They are very tiny, but they're everywhere in this part of Tennessee, and they just aren't opening their eyes. They're not aware that they're out there.
Could you explain to the layperson what a Carolina chickadee looks like, please?
Yes. So Carolina chickadees, they are very small birds. I would say about 3 inches tall at their largest. And their most obvious characteristic is they have a little black cap on their heads. Okay. And they're pretty much gray and with a little bit of white on their breast. And they're very, very vocal during the territorial months, so when they're being territorial, excuse me. So now is the time that you would be hearing them most frequently. They are very prevalent at bird feeders, particularly if you have sunflower seed out. That is their favorite type of food. So if you're trying to attract birds, provide them with the sunflower seeds. Another species that I studied was the tufted titmouse, and they are slightly larger and gray over most of their body, and they're called the tufted titmouse because they have a little tuft of feathers on their head that when they're a little agitated or trying to seem bigger than the rest of their friends, they'll raise that tuft up. And these two species communicate with one another across species and tell each other where food is and when predators are around. So overall, it's a pretty interesting system.
It embarrasses me that a 2-inch bird can open a sunflower seed when I can't.
I think an interesting point in this is the differentiation between what we call communication and what we call a language. So I think Dr. Browning will agree that most species on this planet have a form of communication.
Absolutely.
Right? So the dogs in 101 Dalmatians can send messages across very, very long distances. Or your cat can, meow, and tell you it's hungry or something. But as far as we know, we are the only species that can use a complex structured form of communication called language. Although there is some hints, a little bit of evidence that perhaps that some dolphins have the ability to use a language proper as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So birds are communicating.
Yes.
Anything in particular? I mean, I imagine most people don't really think of them as, maybe they think of the bird solely or independently making sounds when they're threatened. But actually what your work has found is that they're capable of communicating in advance to one another.
Absolutely. One of the reasons that and we'll talk about Carolina chickadees at the moment. One of the reasons they're called a chickadee is because when they are communicating, they use a lot of what we call D notes. And so when you hear their call, you'll hear them say chickadee dee, or if there's something really scary out there, they'll actually add even more notes, so D notes. So if you'll humor me, they sound like chickadee dee dee dee, or even longer. I've heard calls that had 27 D notes added to them.
Is it actually the note D?
Well, we call them D notes when we are coding them in the lab, but they sound like that sound, D.
So if a bird was not very good at singing, would they be a chickadee flat?
Chickadees.
Probably. Dr. Browning, you've been around the birds too long.
I speak bird now.
Well, a word of caution to those of you who wander in the woods. The birds are talking about you. We're going to have another break and be back in just a few minutes.
I win.
You're listening to WLMU Radio, 91.3 FM broadcast.
every Monday through Friday at noon. You can catch Midday Classics hosted by me, the Magic City Madman, Tyler Rowlett. It's a full hour of classic music from all genres. You'll hear classic rock, funk, soul, R&B, and lots more. It's a soundtrack to your lunch hour every Monday through Friday at noon, right here on 91.3 WLMU. Every Friday night, we take it way back with Friday Night Oldies with your host, Gary Daniels. Gary will be playing artists such as Chuck Berry, The Beatles, Buddy Holly, and many more. You can catch them all right here on Friday Night Oldies on 91.3 WLMU.
Support for WLMU's broadcast and webcast is made possible by Lincoln Memorial University. Established in 1897, LMU is located alongside the Cumberland Mountains of East Tennessee, Southeast Kentucky, and Southwest Virginia. LMU offers educational opportunities that are based on the foundations of tradition, values, and service. To find out more about academics, campus life, athletics, admissions, and financial aid, you can visit their website, lmunet.edu.
Weekday mornings, over on our media partner, WCXZ AM 740, you can tune your radio dial to Amos in the Morning. Host Tom Amos presents news, interviews, insight, and a little music. That's Amos in the Morning, Monday through Friday, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern, on WCXZ AM 740, and online at 74wcxz.com.
If you're a fan of bluegrass music, then our sister station, WCXZ AM 740, has the program for you. Each weekday morning from 9 till noon, you can tune the dial to Bluegrass for Breakfast with your host, Larry Carter, where he will serve you up a good mess of bluegrass, everything old and new and in between. That's Bluegrass for Breakfast on AM 740 WCXZ.
For the best of jazz and big band, you can turn your radio dial to 91.3 FM to hear great artists such as Duke Ellington, Sonny Stitt, Dean Martin, Billie Holiday, and many other legendary musicians. That's the Thursday Night Jazz Cafe, from 9 to midnight on your radio dial at 91.3 FM and worldwide at 913thegap.com.
And you are listening to WLMU Radio, broadcasting on the FM dial at 91.3, streaming worldwide at 913thegap.com. And you can find us and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/WLMU-FM, a broadcast and community service of Lincoln Memorial University. Thank you for listening in to WLMU in Harrogate, Tennessee.
This is Dr. Verner. Welcome you back to a conversation that is going to the birds. We're going to continue that conversation just a little bit longer, and then we'll move on to some other topics in a bit. We were talking about, you guys were exchanging about the difference between communication and language, and the fact that the vocalizations of these birds not only announces things to other birds, but other animals as well.
Yeah, that's right. So one really interesting thing about the Carolina chickadees, and actually tufted titmice have a similar call with D notes, is that, you know, if they have only a few of those D notes in their call, it signifies, you know, something that is not too threatening. And we've done several studies, both when I was a grad student, and I hope to continue this in my research here at Lincoln Memorial. But we also know if they have lots of D notes in their calls, then it signifies something really scary. So if you are walking around the woods and you start hearing these calls, you know, they're either afraid of you, or more likely they see a hawk. So you should look up and see, you know, what bird of prey is hanging around, because they will make these calls and let all of their other same species and interspecies, cardinals, even squirrels, react to their calls, so that they know to go and hide. And there are some suggestions that these birds, Carolina chickadees, tufted titmice, are getting closer to what we would call a language rather than what we call just simple communication between species.
That's something that I think is really difficult to make that distinction. So that would be, probably would be something contentious in the field, I would think.
Well, the thing is, so I've only studied D notes as a note itself, but other researchers have gone in and looked at the subtle changes in the sounds of those D notes themselves, as well as how far apart each of those notes are. And it is still something that we need to study further, but truthfully, there are a lot of researchers who are in support of it being more language-like. It is certainly open-ended, one of the main requirements for language. We're trying to figure out if there is some kind of grammar or syntax associated with it. But we do know that there are certain calls that are used sort of like words to communicate to other species. So it's getting close to fulfilling all of the requirements of language.
And are they unique in that fact, or are there some other birds that sort of have that complexity in their calls as well?
Well, that's interesting. So I've been speaking mainly about Carolina chickadees, but their related species, the tufted titmice, that they are able to communicate with across species, have very similar results. And there are a couple of other what we call satellite species. These are species of bird that sort of sometimes hang out with the birds in the winter. They flock together. Sometimes they want to be away from those other species. So things like nuthatches, if you're familiar with white-breasted nuthatches, or any of the woodpecker species around Tennessee. Okay, they are sometimes these satellite species, and they'll react to the communications of Carolina chickadees and tufted titmice.
What I think is interesting about a lot of these topics is it shows sort of the breadth or the wide range of psychology. And so we can talk about the human brain in one instance and the origins of music in the other, and a Carolina chickadee, and and they all relate to one another in some fashion.
Absolutely.
Carolina chickadees and Johnny B. Good. I'm going to pull us out of the woods and into the light. Chris is sitting next to me here. Chris is not just a psychology major, but he's also, is it a major or a minor in business?
I'm planning on declaring double major. I just
Okay.
haven't filled out the paperwork yet.
And I think that's important. Psychology students are unique in many respects. And one is certainly their people skills, but also they're excellent candidates as entrepreneurs and as people in the business world. You take a good deal of knowledge about human behavior, about skills in organizing. And one good thing about college psychology students, is that the focus is getting something done, getting something accomplished. It's not far removed from the goal. What do you expect you might do with that double major?
Well, I'm not totally sure yet. I have a few interests. I'm in the clinical or counseling track. I'm interested in that. So I would consider maybe down the road trying to do some sort of, management of mental health facilities, or industrial organizational psychology, and looking at how psychology affects our employment, our employees, our coworkers, buying decisions. Behavioral economics, I think, is really interesting. So I'm got quite a few things I'm looking into, and not exactly sure what I'll decide on yet.
Well, I think you represent one of the important qualities in psychology students is that you're looking beyond the discipline itself into those aspects out there in the community where you can actually serve in a leadership role. And I think that's important.
And I think, sorry to interject,
Yeah,
but
no, go ahead.
I think that's one of the benefits of a psychology degree, an undergraduate psychology degree.
I agree.
Gives you those analytical tools, those critical thinking tools, statistics, knowing how to do research, knowing how to integrate and synthesize material, And it can serve as both a stepping stone to other possible avenues, or it can continue on within psychology itself. So it contains that flexibility, Meow Days, that'll allow you to branch off into different areas if you choose to, or continue exploring psychology at the graduate level.
I agree, and having owned an outpatient clinic, those business skills are critically important. Wake up in the morning and ask, are you going to make enough money to survive? Go to bed that night, ask, did you make enough money to survive? But having those skills, having that mindset, I think is really important. One of the things I'd like for listeners to appreciate is when you spend as much time as we have in this discipline, you begin to gain insights and see patterns of things. And I'd like to know if there are any things that stand out about our field, about the changes in our field, about the things that suggest the progressive nature of our discipline in your own area. What do you say? I'm kind of throwing that out to all of you.
Well, the only thing that comes to mind, at this moment is that I've noticed, having focused quite a bit on evolutionary psychology research, both as a grad student and, of course, as a faculty member, I feel like the breadth of research looking at these evolutionary questions has grown exponentially over the past, I would say, 15 years. And that's really exciting, and I actually hope to, at some point, kind of dip my toes in that pond as well. I'd love to do some research answering or trying to answer some of these evolutionary questions.
Lee?
I think there's a couple of ways to answer this. I think the field, sort of as Dr. Browning said, is becoming very specialized, right? So we kind of had this conversation the other day, that in the dawn of psychology, when there were a handful of people, all the 10 psychologists there were in the late 1800s had all the knowledge about psychology. But to now, it's such a growing field that one has to specialize in such a fine area because there's such a vast amount of knowledge. And so you do sometimes have to pull back and try to look at these bigger pictures. For me, the areas that I'm interested in, I think there are sort of two main large discoveries that have propelled the field forward over the past 30 to 50 years. Probably the main one has been localization of function, understanding how the brain works more, how neurology is related to our everyday behavior. And some of this is the advent of technology, so an MRI machine or an fMRI machine or high-resolution electrode recordings, or just even increasing processor speed in computers that allows us to record these things. We didn't have a lot of those things 25, 30 years ago. And so we've made amazing strides in discovering how our brain operates. That isn't meant to say that we have it all figured out yet. There's tons that we don't know, and we would have to pull Dr. Steve Cowan in here to have a philosophical discussion if an organism can ever truly understand itself. So that's a philosophical debate we can have. But we're understanding more and more. But it's kind of one of those things that you realize when you get to graduate school or maybe a postdoc level, that the more you know, the more you realize there is to know. And so it kind of opens up that Alice's wormhole, so to speak.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that as well. The changes or the knowledge that has grown exponentially in neuroscience has come to affect even psychotherapy, which obviously is of concern to me. But looking at what we do in helping individuals who have problems, it's changing, and it's changing rather remarkably and fast. it's really an interesting change, kind of revolutionary in many respects. We're going to take a final break and be back in a moment with more discussion about psychology in your life.
Every Friday night, we take it way back with Friday Night Oldies with your host, Gary Daniels. Gary will be playing artists such as Chuck Berry, The Beatles, Buddy Holly, and many more. You can catch them all right here on Friday Night Oldies on 91.3 WLMU.
Located here on the campus of Lincoln Memorial University is the Abraham Lincoln Library and Museum. It houses one of the top 5 Lincoln and Civil War collections in the world. Located on the main entrance of LMU on U.S. Highway 25E in Harrogate, Tennessee. Further information at 423-869-6235 and worldwide at www.lmunet.edu/museum.
The Lighthouse Career Training Center thrift store is open to the tri-state community. Items available for purchase include adult and children's clothing and shoes, household furnishings, appliances, baby items, toys, books, and glassware. Open Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Located in the Old Bell County Vocational Building between U.S. Highway 119 and Old Bell High Road. Their phone number is 606-337-3165. All proceeds go to the Lighthouse Career Training Center, a nonprofit organization assisting at-risk youth and adults with skills to help them succeed in their life plans.
We're back. The topic is psychology, and we've been talking about how the field has been expanding and growing. And I'd like to kind of capitalize on that theme by bringing to the listeners' attention that we've had quite a gift. The 20th century has allowed us to have life expectancy approximately 30 extra years. In the early 1900s, people were their life expectancy was in the middle 50s. Now it's in the early 80s. And so with that extra gift of time, we'd like to encourage listeners who are not just young adults, but adults in midlife to consider enhancing their education and understanding about things in the world, and consider Lincoln Memorial University as a place to do that. We are looking at a rather revolutionary period in our lives. Almost everything has changed. The trajectory for adult aging is completely different than what it has been in the past. Before, the path to aging was fairly clear and a single path. Now people at midlife are getting college degrees, changing jobs, changing residence, changing the state that they live in, and a number of other things along with that. And we'd like to encourage the midlifers to consider enhancing their education here at Lincoln Memorial University. Anything else you guys would like to talk about that you think would be of interest to our audience?
I've got a question, if I may.
Sure.
The psychology of regions and sections of our country, how people identify, here in Appalachia. I know that Lincoln Memorial University provides a service to our region here in southern Appalachia. But having traveled the country myself and coming across different cultures and different peoples within the United States, are there any specialized studies in psychology about regions of a country in the cultures and subcultures in that nation and in that region? just out of curiosity.
But there are, along with basically cultural differences, there's a lot more emphasis on those differences that individuals bring to a common venue. We look far more to match people's cultural differences, to be able to appreciate those differences, and in many respects, those differences allow. I think some people at some point feel that the pluralism in our culture works against integration, but in fact, as we borrow from one another, we enhance that integration in our culture. But yes, there's a lot of cultural emphasis, regional emphasis, differences in needs, rural areas of poverty versus areas of wealth, and so forth. I think we've become much more aware of differences in many different respects than in the past. Anybody?
Yeah, and I think there's other aspects in which these different regions sort of are studied within psychology, but maybe indirectly. So the study of language or psycholinguistics, the psychology of different languages, will look at bilingualism, or they'll look at dialects of different regions of the country. Certainly in cognitive psychology, if we're talking about intelligence testing, one of the contentions of intelligence testing is the idea of creating a culture fair test. So your socioeconomic status, the opportunities you have growing up, which we know obviously vary by region, how does that influence your ability to take standardized intelligence tests? And so that leads to the question of, are these tests fair across the board, and is there anything that can be done about it? So all of these things sort of reveal themselves when you're looking at the different facets of psychology. You can look at those different areas.
How about Autumn and Chris? How would you describe your experience here at Lincoln Memorial in terms of people from different, not only just different regions in Tennessee or in the United States, but we have a fairly large foreign student population here.
Being a student athlete, I encounter plenty of foreign people, because most of the athletes here most of them aren't from this country, especially not this region. Rarely you'll meet anyone from this region. But in the classroom, most of the time I find that it's usually children, people from this region that we encounter, unless they're playing a sport. Because it's hard to hear about this college. If I hadn't heard about it through lacrosse, I would not have heard of LMU at all. But so I think that's the way we get brought here, unless you're from here.
And I'm pretty involved in student government, and that's one of the things is we've had a lot more of the international students getting involved with that recently. And I really appreciated that opportunity to work with them, because they do have such different perspectives on things that sometimes someone will say something and they're like, well, this is how we did this there, and I'm like, I never would have thought of that, because me here never left the deep south ever except once. So I haven't had that experience of other places and how they're thinking. So it's a strong benefit to have the other perspectives.
Do you see more blending, if you will, in terms of students coming together with one another? What you were describing, somebody showing you a different way of doing something than that you had thought of before. But do you notice also that in those interactions with one another, that maybe something relatively unique on this campus is that there are a lot of people from different areas, that it's not an obstacle, that it's actually brings students together?
I think it does. I never really see it as an obstacle, because just being able to be in class and hear, I was in an English class with a guy from, I think it was Iraq, and we were talking about single stories and how we only hear one side of it. So being able to hear stories and everyone else's point of view from all over the globe, I think it's an awesome opportunity that you have at this school, and I think it really helps, because I might not have the ability to travel to all these places, but meeting these people from these different places it really helps. And like we have a kid in our social class from Germany, and hearing his culture and hearing Abby from England and having all these like different stories integrating, I think it's really helpful in learning, not just education, but also about culture.
Yeah, Dr. Graves likes to take full advantage of calling on anyone who's from out of the area.
So what do you think about that? Does it help out?
I think it does, because it's one of those things where you can say, well, studies in this country have shown that, they behave a little differently. But to have someone who's actually lived there or is from there be able to say, well, yeah, we see this, but from the perspective of someone who's actually lived it, and being able to get that firsthand account of it.
If I may add to that, I spent some time in the military, and when you take people from all parts of the country put together into a unit, whether at basic training or whether at your assignment or if you're on deployment, you take different aspects of mindsets and and worldviews, and you operate. It's interesting how it really helps to make for smooth operations, because you got that sense of teamwork that the military instills. But also when you're overseas and you're working with your allies and your counterparts, and they may have a different way of working the same job, the same mission, but you train together and you learn from each other. So there's certainly a benefit, I think, in that.
Well, I think this is a good way to bring a close to this program. The fact that there's so much diversity in the world, and even in the microcosm of a university, and that it can work. It can work in the same way that birds and other creatures in the wild work to some extent. But we hope that we've given you a little taste of our program. We continue to grow. We're actually hoping maybe that at some point we will develop a master's program for students. But we'd like to encourage people to participate in the activities of this university. We're proud of the community. We want the community to be proud of us, and we're proud of our students. We graduate students who go on to not only graduate school but to positions of importance and contribution. Anything else you guys would like to say? We're into our last few minutes here.
Well, I do believe congratulations are in order for a couple of our students who won awards at the Blue Ridge Undergraduate Research Conference last week.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's right.
Of course, we always want to thank our students. Their attention and devotion is what makes our days easier, and we do it for the shorties. So thank you to them.
Well, and we did have 5 students participate in this Blue Ridge Conference and presented posters, and were recognized for the excellence with which they presented that information on their posters. So we're very proud of our psychology students, and very proud of the students in this facility.
And we should probably announce that we're having an LMU Research Day coming up in just about a couple of weeks. So Friday, April 21st.
And you have been listening to American Culture, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences here at Lincoln Memorial University. We want to thank all of our guests and our hosts today for a very interesting program indeed. And you can tune in once again this Saturday at 10 a.m. for a rebroadcast of this program, and also Sunday at 8 p.m. and then Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. for rebroadcast of American Culture, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Lincoln Memorial University. Now, support for this program is made possible by Lincoln Memorial University in Harrogate, Tennessee. Further information on academics, campus life, educational programs, admissions, financial aid, athletics, and much more, you can find them online at www.lmunet.edu. This afternoon's program was produced by Dr. Martin Sellers. Our technical producer is Gary Daniels. Our student production assistant is John Hobbs. Our program director is Clay Stanifer, and our executive producer is Adam Haley. Our theme music is White Horses, as performed by Tierra Negra and Muriel Anderson. And some of the artists of the music that you heard during the program in transition from into the breaks, we heard from Sonny Rollins. We also heard from the likes of Charlie Musselwhite. We heard also from, we heard from Johnny Rivers and Chuck Berry and Dirk Powell, Tim Herman, and John O'Brien. American Culture, Arts, Humanities, Social Sciences will again rebroadcast this Saturday at 10 a.m., Sunday at 8 p.m., and next Tuesday morning at 7. This has been a WLMU radio production.